I'll introduce myself. I'm Jerry Alford. I am one of the farming advisors at the Soil Association. The other three speakers will continue to introduce themselves as we go on through the session. The agenda for this evening is basically to explain what is the OKNet EcoFeed project. And then we have the three speakers, Florian speaking on the research on alternative protein sources, Leo talking about soya from Europe, and then Mike, his own ambition for soya-free chicken feed. As I said, we'll have questions between each of the speakers, but also questions at the end, just to only follow-up questions. So, OKNet EcoFeed, what is it? OKNet is a Horizon 20 sponsored project with the ambition of supporting the supply of 100% organic and regional food to organic farmers throughout all of Europe. The organisations that are involved, and you can see it's a very wide ranging from Sweden, Denmark, not Sweden, apologies, and down as far as Italy and also Spain, which is missing off that picture there. The organisations involved are there. In the UK, Soil Association and Organic Research Centre are the two organisations that have been running the project. Its aim is to find solutions to the problem of 100% organic and regional food for pigs and poultry. As we know, we have allowances to use less than 100% in organic, but we would really like to get to a situation where we can be 100%. And equally, if we can make it regional, we can therefore reduce the requirement to be importing products, particularly protein, from further afield, which has specifically now got particular negative implications in terms of deforestation and also greenhouse gas emissions associated with transport. The way it's done has been working within industry, which largely in the UK has been with farmers in what has been known as innovation groups. So pig producers, broiler producers and layers have been working together and been sharing existing knowledge, creating new knowledge and trying to discover where the knowledge gaps are and have been, and trying to break through these blockages to either knowledge, experience or farmers taking on these sort of systems. The program itself ended at the end of December 2020, but due to COVID is slightly delayed, and we are now in that phase where the research knowledge, the experience is now being spread. One of the ways in which we've been sharing this knowledge is through the further development of the organicfarmknowledge.org website, which is aiming to become the center point for organic research knowledge and knowledge dissemination within Europe. As UK farmers, we may think we're no longer part of Europe, but actually because the climate is so similar, the research is obviously still linked to what we've been doing, and it's becoming a very useful research tool that we can make use of. It also includes at the moment work from the OKNet Arable project, which finished a few years ago, and is also going to be incorporating the Live Seeds project and also some further work that's been done on live on other areas of research through the Horizon 2020 research program. There will also be more information on the OKNet EcoFeed EU website. Little bit of the question over why, and these are just a few headlines that I pulled off from some reports recently. The France basically looking to reduce its soy imports to use more of its own pulses. Last week, US soybean prices rise to a 6% high. Incredibly, for a country that grows and sells a huge amount of soya, Brazil is actually importing American soya this year because it hasn't had the yields. And we then really have an issue that we as the UK do tend to use too much bought-in products. So we want to try and address and try and challenge these questions. One of the ways we do this is looking at the research available, and fortunate to have with us today Florian Leiber, the head of the Department of Livestock Sciences at FIBL in Switzerland, who's been leading some research on some of the alternative protein sources. What I'd like to do is now hand over to Florian to explain some of the things that he has been doing.
So I hope you see my
Yes.
Full screen of my presentation.
Yes, we do. Yep.
Good evening to everybody here in Basel. In Central Europe is evening and dark. And I am happy and thankful that I may present some of our research on alternative protein sources for monogastric non-ruminant animals, actually. And one of those is in the headlines of the scientific and agricultural news already for some time. It's the insect-based proteins. And I may prepare you that I may disappoint you in my talk about the potentials they have. And another interesting source, and also with a high nutrient recycling potential, could be duckweed. And we are doing in Frick in Fiebe research on both of these alternatives, which I want to introduce to you a little bit. So we all know that animal feed production and the animal nutrition and nutrient emissions are major sustainability issues, also for our organic livestock systems. And this includes high land requirements for concentrate feeds. This includes a high feed food competition, and it includes the emission rates and the nitrogen emissions into the water bodies of the globe are really something which should worry us as at least in the same magnitude as climate change is worrying us. And the question is, what could be solutions? And solutions are in the sense, on the one hand, we need other sources than, for instance, Brazilian soybean. But the question is also, can we somehow recycle those nitrogen amounts which are already in the circles of our agricultural production systems? So insect meals is one question. Are they a solution? What you see on this picture is larvae of the black soldier fly. And most of what I will present is about black soldier fly because this is one of the most interesting insects for feed production, and it is the one we are doing our own research on. So the potential substrates we could use to produce insect meal should be something which is in some sense a waste, to really have a recycling feed production. So it could be byproducts from the feed industries. It could be slaughterhouse byproducts. It could be the waste of the gastronomy. It could be lob or green waste. It could be slurry or dung or sewage sludge. It could be residues from biogas fermenters. What would be common to all these sources is that the nitrogen is in the system already, and what we use is nitrogen out of the system to recycle it. And we would not rely on nitrogen fixation, be it via legumes or via artificial nitrogen fertilizers. Of course, we have a legal situation at the moment where for the production of the insect meal, I don't mean the feeding of the insect meal, this is a second point, but the production of the insect meal, of course, is also already under restrictions. So of the potential substrates I mentioned, only very few are allowed at the moment by EU regulations and legislation. So this would be animal feed materials, which are already in the catalog of feed, animal feed. The question is what sense it would make if we produce an animal feed based on an animal feed. it would be food for human consumption. This is probably even less sensible to use food to produce feed for animals, to produce food for humans. But what is interesting here are the waste, food waste is from the production processes. And in our research, we quite intensively rely on these. So for instance, if there is pasta convenience food production, then they produce a lot of waste. When they cut out the ravioli, then there will be residues, and these can be fed to insects. And then there's a lot of potential substrates for insects, which are not allowed, of course. And what would be allowed, again, is garden or vegetable residues, or the lop and green waste. And to be honest, so these green ones are not, in a sense of recycling something, are not the most interesting materials. But anyway, research should has the duty to present, to produce data for future changes of regulations. And for instance, to maybe in some future, there would be a possibility to allow byproducts from slaughterhouses to feed to insects if we can, by research, demonstrate that there is no transfer of pathogens, of any pathogens from the animal residues to the insect products. And this is one of the points. Here is a very lot of research still ahead of us to be done. We have to keep in mind that if we produce feed on the basis of insects, this is an additional trophic level in the food chain. So we are talking about non-ruminants, and if we introduce insects into the non-ruminant food chain, this is like inserting an external rumen for non-ruminants. It is really an additional trophic level with additional energy losses, with additional requirements for nitrogen and so on, with additional emissions. And therefore we have two essential questions to answer. And this is how efficient, and this means how sustainable is the producing insect protein and feeding insect protein to livestock, the two levels we have to look at. At the moment, it is rather a black box in our knowledge, these insects. So we have the inputs, all the different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and we have inputs from these potential substrates, which are not desirable, like heavy metals, like toxins, like residues of antibiotics, whatever, or pathogens. And all this constitutes the substrate in which the insects are growing. And then we have the growing larvae, and we know very few about their digestion, about their metabolism, their microbiome, so their synergies with the gastrointestinal and substrate microbials. We don't know the combustion rates, the synthesis rates, and we know only few about true nutrient conversion efficiency rates. We don't know how large is the greenhouse gas emissions from insect productions or other emissions. What is the value of the residues from these substrates? What we want is the larvae meal. What we want is actually the protein. And the question is, what amount and quality of protein can I produce dependent of the composition of the substrate? And if we compare this with the knowledge we have about pig nutrition, about poultry nutrition, we are at the very beginning of a journey if we want to feed insects in a informed and in a sustainable, science-based way. So I want to show some slides from the literature about feed conversion is the first one. So how high is the feed conversion by black soldier fly? And from this paper, you see an example. You see here a benchmark, a control. This was chicken feed, poultry feed fed to these insects. And this is the gold standard in all the insect research in Europe, is always chicken feed. So because we all know black soldier fly is growing best on chicken feed, but we want to make it a chicken feed. So you understand the problem. And if we have this benchmark and then compare it with feeding, so the benchmark is insects fed on chicken feed, and then it's compared with insects fed on mill byproducts, on canteen waste, on different collections of human feces, poultry slaughter waste, or cow manure, or canteen waste, only vegetable. Then you see it's all poorer. So the protein conversion efficiency is always poorer than if compared with the chicken feed. What makes it better is to compose these different potential substrates, to compose them, and every of the treatments mentioned here are compositions of different single substrates from this left side. And I just want to say, with the composition, we can even overrun the efficiency of the chicken feed. And this again means this needs research to be very clear about what I have to combine in order to really have an efficient production, or at least somehow efficient production of these insects. If we look at the ecological footprint of black soldier fly production, I think these numbers are very important. So here is compared fish meal with soybean meal and with meals from black soldier fly produced either on food grade materials, on feed grade materials, or on residues. And we have in the first line here the global warming potential per unit, I'm not sure, per kg or so. Doesn't matter. What is important is the proportion. And you see, if we produce black soldier flies on food grade material, which makes no sense anyway, the global warming potential is way higher than with soybean or fish meal. With feed grade, it is close to fish meal, but 3 times higher than soybean. And with residues, it should be less than feed grade, but they grow so poorly so that it is even higher than the feed grade, the global warming potential. Which means at this moment, so this is from 2019, yeah, and in these days, we have no recipes to produce insects on a lower global warming potential than soybean meal. In our own experiments at FIBE, we measured gas emissions from different substrates from with black soldier flies. So we have a fiber-rich substrate, it's the black lines, and we have a protein-rich substrate, it's the gray lines. Three repetitions per feed, and always at the days when with the red circles, we added new feed material to these larvae. And we measured in climate chambers the emissions here for CO2, and you see the CO2 peaks always when shortly after providing new feed. Well, CO2, we are all breathing beings, and as are also the insects, so this is not surprising, but importantly, we have to be aware that there's also methane emission. And this, of course, the more fiber is in the food, in the feed. However, if we want to use residues, they may be fiber rich. And the same as in cattle. So if we digest fiber, we produce methane. And we also have N2O emissions. And this logically more on the basis of the protein-rich feeds. If we count this all together and sum it up in CO2 equivalents, then we have some figures of CO2 equivalent emissions per kg of larval biomass. And just to bench it, so it is less than 20% of what beef production emits per unit of biomass, but it is not nothing. So we have to consider here also climate relevant emissions from larvae productions. And it again will require a lot of research and a lot of technology to catch these emissions or to keep them as low as possible. Well, now looking at the biological feeding value of the black soldier fly proteins, we have amino acid profiles which are well in the range of soybean. So this is clear on the animal feeding side. If we feed these insect meals to chicken, they have a very comparable feeding value compared to soybean. And we have some problems and some questions about the digestibility, especially of the protein, which is still low. And this is related to the chitin, which is very tricky to separate from the pressed larvae meals. But if we look at the performances, I will not go into detail here. I just can tell you from our experiments and from other groups, for broiler chicken, as well as for laying hens, the performance, the growing performance or the laying performance and the quality of the products is equal if we use black soldier fly meal, even in large amounts, even if we replace all the soy meal, we receive equivalent performances and quality. The same is true for the layers. So we can say that black soldier fly is equivalent with soybean regarding performance and product quality, with some exceptions, but in general, yes. There may occur some digestion problems. Well, I want to switch for the last minute of my talk to the duckweed. Duckweed is a small plant growing on the aquatic surfaces. And it's interesting because it has a very high protein concentration. It has a very, if the climate is right, it has a very high productivity. It may make no sense to give here the figures in amounts per hectare, but anyway, you see that there is a 3.1 tons of crude protein harvest per hectare per year, which is quite productive if we would compare it to arable land. My colleague Timo loves to make this comparison with the arable land. And the question is, would this be a good feed for, or could we produce out of duckweed a feed for fish, for pigs, for poultry, or even for ruminants? Why? Because we could show that there is a very efficient uptake if we use diluted slurry and let the duckweed grow on the surface of diluted slurry. There is a very efficient uptake of NH4, so of ammonia nitrogen, and also not bad of the NO3. Yes, of the NO3, and a very efficient uptake also of the phosphorus. So here we really have the potential, if we develop the right technology to produce duckweed on diluted slurry, we have the potential in production systems where slurry nitrogen is a problem to recycle part of this nitrogen into duckweed. Then we have a technological challenge to produce a dry and a good food on the basis of this duckweed, because it's very, very wet. But this is a running project where we intensively at FIBEL will work in the next 4 years, starting from this year, on these technological issues to solve them. And I'm completely convinced that on the ecological side, regarding the ecological indicators, this is the more promising alternative protein feed production than the insects are. And I could here, but I will skip it. I could show you that there is, at this moment, we tested it only with fish. There is comparable growth rates and feed conversion rates with controls if we ferment the duckweed after harvest. So my conclusions are that insect-based protein meal from the black soldier fly has very good properties for poultry nutrition, but its production itself requires 2 high-quality substrates, and these substrates in many cases are a good direct chicken or pig feed, and therefore not really sensible at this point. And the environmental footprints of black soldier fly productions are at the moment way too high to make them competitive with soybean. This is the disappointment I have to bring to you. And much more optimism I have about the duckweed as an option, due to the high uptake rates for nitrogen and phosphorus from the slurry, and due to the high quality and high concentrated protein in the dry matter, provided that the technological issues can be solved. So with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Florian. Excellent. That's really interesting, and probably takes a bit of time for us to sort of think through. Okay, Florian, we have a couple of questions, so apologies for my blip on IT as usual. One of the questions particularly is that, were you comparing on the soybean growth, when you were comparing with soybean, was that organic or conventional soybean? Because would that have had any effect on the carbon footprint comparisons?
So for the global warming potentials, this was quite sure conventional.
Right.
This is not our study. It's from Wageningen.
Yep.
And this is conventional comparisons.
Okay, great, thank you. A second question is, obviously you've been using black soldier fly larvae. Is there any difference or benefits of them over mealworms as a source of insect protein? Or is that just because, I know a lot of research is done on the black soldier fly, is that just because it's easier that way, or is there a particular reason?
They are very easy to handle, and there is a very low risk of escape. So it's a low biological risk, because the matures will not cause damage if they escape. And well, I can say maybe it was a hype 10 years ago. It is still a hype about the black soldier fly, and then it's kind of a basic decision. So there was a decision. I can even justify it because it was before my time at FIBEL. Okay. And then we have them, and then there's so much work is in it that it is hard to change it on the run.
Okay,
Yeah.
we've had a few questions about the legal aspects of the regulations concerning feeding larvae meals. As it stands at the moment, can you just quickly explain the EU or the situation with feeding insect meal?
So it is forbidden to feed insect meal if they are dead, because they are considered to be animals. And so if they are dead, they are slaughtered, and it is forbidden to feed slaughtered animals to animals. If they are alive, we may. So the feeding, the provision of live larvae to chicken is allowed. And we are running experiments on this as well, but it is quite complicated to have the necessary amounts permanently of living larvae. So it is more a small amount, and it's more for welfare benefits for the chicken than for really being a part of. And allowed is it for fish. So this is the most relevant field at the moment. And it is also relevant because the fish meal is quite more a problem than the soybean even. And so here in fish nutrition and in aquaculture, we may have really an option to do something with, to improve something with the insects.
Okay. Yes, a very technical question, which I don't know whether we know. What variation is there in the omega-6 PUFA content of the meat? Have you done any work on that? Omega-6 is an omega-3 and omega-6.
What variation?
Yeah, does it change between on the chicken?
Yes, of course. It is very dependent on the feed. So on the substrate, as is in the vertebrate animals. So depending on the feed, the omega-3 and omega-6 ratios will change in the same, basically in the same mechanism as with vertebrates. But there is one specific point. We have a large concentration of C12 lauric acid in the larvae. No one knows why. And this is not really desirable in an animal feed. But anyway, it is not about the oil. It is anyway a problem that we are looking for protein feed. And it's a little bit a question what to do with the oil.
Okay, and then moving on to the duckweed question, or the duckweed question. Do you feel that there's a way of producing duckweed on a scale for animal feed without using slurry? So do you feel there's going to be a practicalities aspects that's going to make the duckweed probably with a duckweed?
Without using slurry?
Yeah.
Well, if we not use slurry, then the question is what would be the alternative? We did experiments with sewage sludge. But I don't think that this is really an option for animal feed. Then it may be an option for kind of a green fertilizer or so. And the other thing could be if we have really damaged waters like lakes with very high eutrophication. They could be used for cleaning this, and could be then converted into feed, but I don't think this is in production scales. So in our eyes, it is really the slurry to be used, and it makes sense on those farms who have a slurry problem.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. I think that's all of the questions we have from there. So Florian, thank you very much. Actually, no, on a small scale, could duckweed be fed without being dried?
Yes, on the small scale, we did not test so far, but we think yes, in pig nutrition especially.
Right. Good.
So if we feed anyway pigs with liquid feed sometimes, so then we can also introduce the duckweed in directly freshly. But anyway, they have to be washed because it's on the slurry.
Well, yes, there is that. Pigs, I've never noticed worrying too much about what they eat, but we've got to think about the feed and way it looks to other people when they come and see it. So, Florian, that's excellent. Thank you very much for your time. And we now shall move on to the next slide. Thank you, Florian. Now moving on. We've spent the last half an hour criticizing soya, finding alternatives to soya. But I think we often forget that we can grow soya in Europe. We don't need to haul it all the way across the world, from China and India if it's organic, and from Brazil, Argentina, and America if it's conventional. So I'd like to hand over now to Leo, who's the head of research and innovation at Dono Soya. And I hope I said that right because I struggle with it. But Leo, carry on.
Thank you, Cherry, for the nice introduction. So let me just set up the screen share. Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody, from my side. My name is Leopold Rittler. I'm really looking forward to give you some insights today, the next half hour about soya from Europe. But before I'm heading off with my presentation, I would like just to give you some fun fact, actually, about soya and ask you a question. So what do you think, in which country was the first book about soybean, and I mean entirely about soybean, published? Just go into yourself a little bit, just think about soybean, what do you think about? Don't worry, I give you the answer. And it's probably a surprise for you. It has been 1878 when Professor Haberlandt published Die Sojabohne in Vienna, actually. And yes, this is the first book written entirely about the soybean. In this book, Professor Haberlandt summarized his research trials he did back then on about more than 100 fields in Central Europe. You see on this map the locations of these trials. He was investigating how soybean could be already produced in the fields of Europe back then. And his trial results was then published in this book. So I'm giving now this little anecdote just to illustrate or demonstrate that soybean is not has already some tradition or some history here in Europe, and it's not such an alien crop as many believe actually about the soybean in Europe. So, but now coming to the topic of my presentation, actually, it's not only about soya from Europe. It's also, in my presentation, I will look into potentials of using own-grown, self-grown, homegrown soybeans on my own farm. First, it's about producing them, of course, and then secondly, I give you some insights how you can actually also use them in terms of a feed product. But first, let me just briefly introduce where I'm coming from, my organization, Dono Soya. Dono Soya has been founded in 2012 in Vienna, and now we have offices and representatives located in Eastern Europe, so in Serbia, Romania, Moldova, or Ukraine. These are the major soybean producing countries in Europe also. Our vision is a sustainable, safe, and European protein supply. And we want to achieve this vision with having two major goals in mind. First, we think that producing soybeans in Europe, so we want to support the sustainable production actually here in Europe. And secondly, we also want to develop corresponding value chains. So we think that not only producing is enough, but we in our work also work on the development of the corresponding sector value chains. We are an independent organization, so this means we are not an organization which is state-owned by this. We are actually a private entity. We are working non-profit, and we are a member-based organization. So our members are coming from the whole value chain, from the breeding, from seeds, from trade, from farming, or NGOs also, as well as retail. So we're coming with our members, the whole value chain, the whole soya sector. Today we have more than 200 members in 25 countries. So I'll give you some practical examples what we are doing in terms of field work and production and farming. We are organizing field days and organize educational activities for farmers. In my capacity, I'm involved in these activities as well as in research projects. We are actually supporting research projects in Europe, ranging from soybean breeding or optimization of plant production, as well as post-processing. My colleagues are working in the area of certification, and there there's our sales and QM team, for example, are working with certifying soybeans from Europe according to our quality standards, donor soya and Europe soya. Thereby, they work together with about 8,000 farmers we supply in our certified supply chains. They supply certified ingredients for food products, soya food products, as well as certified ingredients as for feed production and in the use of animal products, for example. Our organization is also involved in the area of policy development and also market analysis and B2B meetings. So just to give you an example, which kind of practical activities we are doing. Now let me come to the to soybean production and how does it look actually in Europe? What are the key elements of soybean production? And the main thing about to know is that soybean production in Europe has faced the last 10 years a quite positive trend, or experienced a quite positive trend. Since 2011, the area has doubled, and now in 2019, it reached about 4 million hectares. This means, but these 4 million hectares are located, and you see this on the right hand, in countries outside of the European Union, in our neighbors, Ukraine and Russia. They cover quite a large extent of the European soya surface. Inside the European Union, Italy or Romania are the largest producers. In terms of organic production, and this is a particularity of European soybean production, the organic share is quite high. Romania, France, and Austria are one of the leading organic soybean producers. So these were some like the main figures about soybean production in Europe, really in a nutshell. And let's look now into the field aspect. So producing soybeans really from a practical point of view. You need to know that only non-GMO cultivars are allowed to be used in Europe, also including our Ukraine and Russia, for example. A very positive thing is that we have more than 10 breeding programs based here in Europe, which are really the essential that we also have suitable cultivars and varieties for the production. Soybean is a legume crop, so it also has the capacity for fixing nitrogen. You only need to apply bacteria before seeding on the seeds, and then it already can self-supply itself with nitrogen from the air. In terms of crop management, as we are growing non-GMO cultivars, we cannot also not use some Roundup, glyphosate-based products during the vegetation period. So we need to use, in the case of chemical weed management, selective herbicides. There are also quite many conventional as well as organic producers who are working with mechanical weeding, and this works also very well in soybean. A very positive thing is what we currently observe here in the European soybean production is that we hardly have any pest and disease problems. We are really lucky in this situation, and we hope that we can. This trend will remain also for the next decades. It might change with an increasing production intensity, but we haven't seen this in the core regions during the last decades. So this is a very positive thing that we actually hardly need any fungicides or insecticides if in talking about the chemicals. The organic producers, they also don't have very little issues about pest and disease. So this is a really fortunate situation here. Looking now into the yield levels, and this is interesting, I think. If you look on the map on the right hand, you see average yields on the country level. And Italy, you see there has a yield of 3.2, average yield between 2014 and 2018. And this is a quite good yield, actually. It's among the top 3 yields according to FAO statistics, right next to Brazil and USA. So the key message, actually, what you like you to understand is that it grows in many regions quite well, actually, soybean. So this is also the reason why the area has increased in the last years quite significantly. There are also some plots where extraordinarily high yields are possible, up to 5 tons even. The protein level can range very much from 30 to up to 44%. This depends on varieties, the season, and the farm management. And now many of you may wonder, is it also possible to grow soybeans in the UK? And for many of you, this maybe surprising answer is yes, it is possible, actually. And there's also a company based in UK, the Soya UK, and they're already working on this issue since a couple of years. And the main general indicator for you, maybe if you're now located in the UK and you may wonder if soya can grow in your neighborhood, then you can, I can give you the estimator that the grain maize area or the grain maize is a good indicator, because grain maize has similar climate and soil requirements let's say climate requirements. So when grain maize grows in your region, then also soybean would find suitable areas to grow. In terms of field machinery, quite the normal or the standard machinery is necessary for producing soybeans. There's not big challenges here. In terms of agronomy, producers really value that soybean is for many winter zone cereal crops, for rotations, an excellent break crop. And the UK soya mentions, for example, that it works well to combat the blackgrass issue. Also in UK, it finds little pesticides and disease problems. And they find also that there are attractive gross margins. So the selling price also for producers is quite attractive there. So the main message is also that it also found some good places to grow in the UK. So selling to the market is maybe now the obvious choice for a crop farm. But in the next minutes, I would like to present you a different approach. Present you some ideas and insights about using the soybeans for their own farm as feed for their own livestock. The basics, is to understand, please, that the soybean is an excellent protein source. We have already compared it with the insects before, and it's kind of the standard in terms of animal nutrition. What is important to know is that if you want to feed it, your own grown soybean, to your livestock, that there is some processing necessary before feeding, because soybeans contain anti-nutritional factors, like they're called the trypsin inhibitors. They need to be deactivated before you can feed soybeans to pigs or poultry, for example. This can be done by inducing or by a thermal treatment of the soybeans, and this can deactivate the trypsin inhibitors and make the soybeans or converted to a digestible food or feed, actually. This is in the common sense actually done on a very industrial scale. There are oil mills doing this process on a really big scale with big quantities, but there is also the emerging or a developing trend in Central Europe that also small scale applications, so applications which fitting the sizes of farms, they are available. These technologies are available, and they can also do this job actually on their own farm. And this has been tested already now in practice and is running in Austria or in Germany on 50 or 70 farms and small enterprises already. The feed output is not a soybean meal, as is the standard case. It's a soybean cake or a soybean full-fat toasted. It has about, the cake has about 10% of oil and more than 40% of protein. I'll give you in the next minutes a portrait or outline, actually, the case of a farm, a small enterprise located in Austria, which decided in 2012 to invest in such a small-scale processing unit. This farm is located in southern Austria. It's a family farm, or actually it is an enterprise consisting of 2 family farms. Together they have about 52,000 laying hens. They are selling their eggs to the Austrian supermarkets. They have their own soybean production, so they have their own fields, but also they are buying in feeds from the neighborhood. A particularity about the Austrian egg sector is that since 2010, it's completely non-GM. And since 2013, it has also converted to Soya certified feed. So the feed, the soybean feed used in the egg production in Austria is coming from the Danube region, so from Central Eastern Europe. So this farm is selling the eggs to this market. And in 2012, they decided to invest into a small-scale processing equipment. You see on this photograph a similar processing technology. It's not the one which is used by the farm, but it's of the same brand. This application is a little bit smaller than those used on the farm. But nevertheless, it serves the purpose to give you a picture, how does it look like. So it's something which actually fits in a normal farm-sized facilities. It is, they are producing back then in 2012, they started with 900 tons of non-GM soybeans they processed back then. And since then, their output has increased up to 10,000 tons, including organic soybeans as well as Soya certified soybeans. They have also side products. So the cake, due to the cake production, they also have the oil as a side product. And they also have a dehulling unit associated to this technology. And they are selling hulls to big producers in the region. They are mainly buying soybeans from the neighborhood and selling the processed output, the soybean cake, to farms in the neighborhood. So it's kind of very local and very short supply chains included in this production system. So if we now put our heads into this farm and back then in 2012, who thought about, should I invest into such a technology? I give you now some keywords or some thoughts this farmer shared with me when I prepared for this presentation. And for him, one of the main reasons was actually that he was producing soybeans and was selling them at a low price to the market. But at the same time, he bought for a very high price, actually, the non-GM feed. So this was actually the reason that he thought, well, let's do this job ourselves. And so he looked into different technologies and found the one which works for him. And today, it also works very profitable. You see here that it has about 30 to 40 tons of profit it can make per ton of soybean. This already considers all the expenses for energy, working hours, certification, maintenance, and so forth, as well as the revenues from oil and hulls. This goes very well for him. So the general price situation in the market has been a driver for him for this investment, as well as a positive outlook on the general market in terms of regional produced food products.
Leo, can we speed up a bit, please?
Oh, yes. Yeah, sure.
Clock ticking.
Yeah. so there are also some challenges involved, which I would like just to mention also. He has faced quite a variation in the protein content in his soybeans. And in the beginning, there was also very little know-how available about the subject. So he had to kind of figure it out also very much by himself. One aspect, and I want just to touch very briefly on it, and this is my last slide already, it is about the CO2 reduction potential, which is kind of the use or added value also for him, that he can sell food products with a smaller CO2 footprint, which is due to the use of the certified feed, because the default situation causes here in this, we tested this in our study, 2.8 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of egg, while using the local soybean feed is just emitting 1.8. So it's about 36% CO2 emissions he can save per kilogram of egg. This is due to the replacement of the imported soybeans with a high CO2 footprint, which is due to the deforestation, emissions from the deforestation. So I'm coming now to the end of my presentation and just put it in the summary. I would like just to, when you think about back of this presentation and Soya about Europe, that you consider that soybean grows very well actually at many places here. And it provides also a viable option for UK farms probably. On-farm processing of soybeans has become an asset for farms and enterprises already here in Central Europe. If you're interested in more information about on-farm processing, I recommend to you also to look up the organic farm knowledge, as already Cherry pointed out in the beginning. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you. There's been a great deal of discussion while you've been talking, Leo. Not a huge number of questions, okay. but there's been some great conversations and discussions about the potential of soya growth in the UK. And I can tell you from my own experience that it is possible, but yields are a struggle. It's temperatures. I grew it 20 years ago. Questions about how much does a soya toaster cost?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, there is really depends now on the brand and the manufacturer. And let's say if you just take the toaster, it can start, let's say, from 30,000 euros. It can start. But you also need to consider that you need kind of more of than just a toaster. You maybe want to have a press also, and you need some conveying devices. You need to have storage, and you also need to kind of consider this in your calculations. But just the toaster is starts from 30,000 euros.
Okay, and then this is a much more tricky question, and you may not be able to answer this one easily. Have you calculated to what extent EU soya can meet, in the first place, the increased demand of soya for direct human consumption projected by, and I don't know whether you're aware of the Eat Lancet planetary diet. So if we were, the requirement to satisfy human consumption requirements, or is that, I believe that Alpro is all from French soya, but.
Very, very interesting question. I cannot actually, I would need to know what's the total number of the Lancet recommendation in terms of the soya. Then I could tell you. I don't know this. I can tell you that currently we are producing about 10 million tons of soybeans, and I would expect that's probably that this could be enough. So this is probably enough for the considering the Lancet recommendations, but I cannot be for sure.
Right, okay, that's fine. I'm going to move on. Hand it over now to Mike Mallett. Mike is, well, he'll explain what he is in his talk, but Mike has been moving rapidly towards a soya-free or largely soya-free chicken feed ration, and he is going to talk how you're doing it. So Mike, please carry on.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Mallett. I'm the manager at Maple Farm Kelsale. Maple Farm is located in Suffolk, near the coast. 350 acres, all organic, mostly arable, along with a 3,000 hen layer enterprise, producing the Maple Farm brand eggs. We also produce fruit and vegetables, have a farm shop, and a flour mill thrown in for good measure. Now, I started at Maple Farm 9 years ago, and running a layer operation was totally new to me. My background is more from the fruit and veg side. As I said in the introduction, the farm has a flour mill, and the layer operation had been started sometime before my arrival as a way of utilizing the middlings and the bran from the flour mill as feed. The farm produced its own feed using this mill waste, along with grain and peas grown on the farm, and supplemented with bought-in protein feeds. We have a registered feed mill, and these days have both a roller and a hammer mill to get everything to the hen's liking. When I started, in my naivety, I thought it was normal for poultry producers to mill and mix their own feed, not realizing for some time that we were very much the exception to the norm, and most egg producers just bought their feed in. One of the protein products I had to buy was organic soy expeller. Soy expeller that originated from China, or sometimes India. This immediately made me ask.
Stand up.
I'm in a Zoom meeting and I can't get it so I can hear him. So they got this thing here, but it doesn't.
This immediately made me ask, why are we bringing soya halfway around the world to feed British hens? How can this be sustainable for an organic farm? Why can't we feed hens with a UK sourced diet? Those questions I have been working on ever since. Those questions have come to the fore in the last couple of years, as more people have questions why conventional soya is coming all the way from Brazil, where they are destroying the rainforest to make way for soy and palm oil production. So why is this soya such a difficult issue to overcome? Now, I must clarify that I'm looking at this from the perspective of organic egg production and not meat production. Modern egg layers have been bred over the last 100 years or so, so that we now have hens that will produce over 300 eggs per year. They weigh about 2 kilograms and eat around 120 grams of feed per day. They are amongst the most productive livestock we have. Between the age of 25 and 40 weeks, when a hen is in peak production, if she lays 6 eggs in a week, she is converting about 20% of her own body weight into those eggs each week. That's an extraordinary amount of nutrients being taken out of the hen that needs replacing. The modern hen will start laying at about week 21 and will lay in earnest. It is what they've been bred to do. If the feed does not have a high enough protein level and the other nutritional requirements are not met, the hen will start to draw on her own body reserves, losing condition. By the time she gets to about week 45, the egg numbers will start to drop off. The hen is exhausted. It's just not fair on the hen. So to meet the needs of the hen, we normally require a layered diet in the region of 17.5 to 80% crude protein with a methionine level at about 3 grams per kilogram. In the UK, organic wheat grain usually makes up the bulk of this feed, typically between 30 and 50% of the total. The protein level of organic wheat ranges between 9 and 12%. So we need to add other ingredients much higher in the protein with different amino acids to raise the protein level up to that 18% level. Organic soy expeller at typically 44% crude protein makes this a relatively easy thing to do. One problem is that all the other protein crops we can grow in Europe have lower protein levels than the soya. The best is sunflower seed cake at about 30% protein. Lupin seeds also have about 30%. Field beans or fava beans are typically 26% crude protein, and peas at about 21% crude protein. As we can see from this slide, the amino acid ratios are remarkably similar across a range of legume crops. The top line on the graph is soya. The crops below are field beans and vetch. So the ratio of the amino acids is similar, it's just lower in volume in the commonly grown UK crops. Why is that a problem? Well, for starters, if field beans are 26% crude protein and soya is 44, I would need to use 1.7 times the quantity of field beans over the amount of soya used to match the soya nutrient level. Using that volume of beans is impractical because it then throws the diet out of balance in terms of energy and carbohydrate levels. Also, the field beans have tannins and anti-nutritional factors. That means that without treatment, they cannot be included at the same level required to equal soya. Don't get me wrong, we need to grow more pulses in the UK and use them in our feeds. It's just that I do not see how they can be a direct and total soya replacement. Raw soya beans, not perfect either. Soya has many of the anti-nutritional factors seen in other beans in pulses. The difference is that the processing of extracting the soya oil through pressing or extrusion heats the beans to a level where most of the nutritional factors are destroyed, or the beans are roasted before being used in feed. So I thought, what did we use before soya? Soya has only been used as the principal protein source in animal feed since the mid-1970s after all. The next slide shows a page from the 1950 Farmer and Stock Breeders Yearbook. And this page gives recommended poultry rations. The ingredients are not listed as percentages, but in parts. The principal protein ingredients are pea or bean meal and brewer's grains. But the ingredients with the highest protein content is fish meal and meat and bone meal. The fish meal is included at 10% in the ration. You would think that would taint the flavour of the eggs. In the 1950s, the UK fishing industry was much larger than it is today. And fish meal was relatively cheap. So cheap it was even used as a fertiliser. By the late 60s, that industry was in serious decline as fish stocks were overexploited. The use of fish meal and meat and bone meal was also stopped in ruminant feed after the BSE disease outbreaks, leaving shipped-in soya meal to become the protein of choice. Fish meal is still able to be used in the diets of monogastric animals, pigs and poultry, but it is now very expensive. Note also, in the 1950 diet, they were using cod liver oil as a fat and binding agent. We would nowadays use soya oil for that purpose as well. Having worked this low ration through my feed calculator, it would have been about 17.5% crude protein. I have calculated other feed recipes going back to 1904, using a vast array of different ingredients depending on where in the world it was being produced. Now, many will be thinking, Mike has been working on this problem for 9 years. Why so long? Well, we have over the years tried growing various protein crops that have failed. And each one typically takes a year out of the rotation. Lupins was one I had high hopes for, but failed to grow on our cold, heavy, alkaline soil. Along with lupins, we've also tried camelina and sunflowers, all to no avail. And I will often try things twice to give them a fair chance if I think they might work in a different way. You can see where the time goes. I also have tried the approach of using a more traditional hen breed, like the Sussex pictured, I cannot help but feel we have with poultry created this vicious cycle where we have hens pre-programmed to lay so many eggs that we have no choice but to feed them a high protein diet. What would happen if we de-stressed the system and used the hen that we knew would lay fewer eggs from the outset? The theory being that these breeds are heavier than the modern hen. A Sussex will weigh about 3.5 kilos. They eat more, but they still only produce 1 egg per day. So if they eat more, they can have a lower protein feed and still get the same level of nutrients per egg from that lower protein feed. Also being a heavier, egg laying will be less stressful on the bird in terms of nutrient depletion. We had 3 of these flocks over a 2-year period. Super birds, very docile, tough and hardy. But there were 2 problems. The first is they laid about 180 to 200 eggs per hen per year, which we knew they would, but it proved too low for commercial use. The cost of the infrastructure and labor is the same as running a high performance layer, and these costs were just too much for the performance. The second issue was, boy, could they eat. 160, 170 grams of feed a day was typical, and that feed still had to have a relatively high protein level for the hens to thrive. The feed was not cheap enough to offset the higher intake and the lower performance. To add to our complexity, our hens are pasture-based operation where the hens have year-round access to grass, herb or lay, which they eat extensively. The flocks are small and in mobile sheds, which are moved regularly to facilitate this. This has a positive effect on the flavour and quality of the eggs. The negative side is that we, to an extent, lose control over the hen's feed intake, especially in summer, as it's impossible to know exactly what and how much is being foraged from the range. In the summer, we do see a reduction in compound feed intake, and we do see a drop in egg numbers as well. This is balanced by the health and well-being of the hens who forage for hours and the quality of the final product. In 2016, we started growing vetch, Vicia sativa, as a green manure. And for us, it has become the best, most consistent nitrogen fixing legume we grow. It also yields well. When we harvest the seed, not as good as field beans, but better and more consistent than peas, and fixes far more nitrogen than peas and beans for the following crop. It is also excellent when grown as a mixed crop or an intercrop, especially with oats, where it improves soil structure noticeably. We also regularly grow vetch with rye, which also works really well. Of course, this led me to think whether we could use the vetch seed as a protein feed for poultry. As we saw on the earlier slide, vetch has a similar amino acid profile and crude protein level at 26% to field beans. However, on first inspection, one would say no, it is not suitable for hens. It has all the tannins and trypsin inhibitors activity of beans and an added toxin, glutamyl B-cyanoalanine, to contend with. Glutamyl B-cyanoalanine inhibits the uptake of methionine, and methionine regulates the frequency of egg lay and egg size. In 2018, we became involved with the OKNet EcoFeed project, which was a chance to test whether germination or sprouting could reduce the toxins within the vetch to the point where it could be safely used as poultry feed. Germination had the benefit for me in that the resulting sprouted grain could be fed as a forage, especially in winter, or when, as now, the birds are housed because of bird flu restrictions. I also like the idea of sprouting because it is a process that can be done on farm without the cost of heating or roasting equipment and the associated running cost of such equipment. The slide shows trays of vetch and wheat in the trial growing chamber. In the end, this became quite a complex piece of kit with airflow fans, UV lighting. It typically took 5 days of growth to get the optimum results that you see there. Once sprouted, the vetch becomes far more palatable to the birds. This slide shows a bunch of birds mobbing a tray of sprouted vetch laid on the ground when we were experimentally feeding the birds with sprouted grain last summer. Although we were able to test for the tannins and trypsin inhibitor activity, we could not test for the glutamyl-B cyanoalanine with the commercial lab we used to see what effect we'd had on that toxin. So we need to do further research into that. By the end of the EcoFeed project, we had evolved from tray sprouting to an experimental drum sprouter. This has many benefits in terms of the quality of the sprouted grain produced and showed us a system that is scalable and can be partially automated. I'm now working on a drum system that will be capable of producing hundreds of kilos a week, which even on our scale is what we need to produce. So where are we now and what is the future? For me, the ultimate setup will require me to continue to evolve 3 components. The first component will be using a hen that best suits the system. For me, the ultimate hen is a bird that weighs around 2.5 kilos, eats about 140 grams of feed per day with a protein level of 16 to 16.5%, and lays its egg in an even flow over its working life, not starting in a rush with a peak and then slowly tailing off at the end of the peak lay, and still lays in the region of 260 eggs per year. That slightly lower protein level at 16.5, that's quite important because it's much easier to achieve. Although it's only 1% less than 17.5, it's a lot easier to achieve in that higher protein level. The nearest hens we've found so far to that ideal are the barred rock, a cross between a Rhode Island red and a barred Plymouth rock cockerel, and the black rock or Rhodes rock, which is the reverse cross. The 2 breeds may have the same parentage, but they are completely different in temperament, with the Rhode rocks being the hardiest birds we have and the most phenomenal foragers. Both these breeds weigh in at about 2.2 kilos, so a little lighter than my ideal. The second component is utilizing the farm-grown proteins in the form of the beans and vetch that we've spoken about already. Including these crops in the rotation not only helps the hens, but helps the farm generally in terms of nitrogen fixing and soil health improvements. We are still looking into ways we can reduce the toxins in vetch. It is such a useful crop to us to grow. We want to utilize all its potential. At the same time, we're looking at how we can process beans through either heat treating or extrusion to make them more useful. For me, there is little point in selling our grain and pulse crops into the grain market, even the organic market, if we can convert them into our premium branded products, which are then sold direct to the consumer or retail. It's far better for us. And finally, the third component is the use of insect protein. We have already started a mealworm farm to raise live mealworms to feed to the birds. Feeding mealworms brings us full circle because the perfect food for them is the middlings and bran from the flour mill that started this whole story in the first place. Mealworms, the larvae of the darkling beetle, are rich in protein and fat. This is no quick fix. It will take us at least 6 months to breed up enough stock to be useful, and we are still learning the best way to do this. For every kilogram of mealworms raised, 2 kilograms of frass is produced, perfect for feeding the soil in the horticulture unit, closing the loop still further. And I also have to thank Lizzie Rowe, who I know is listening in, for actually putting me on to the idea of actually starting to grow insect protein. So hopefully when all these three elements in place, we will not only be soya free, but also the feed will be regionally produced. In fact, bulk of the food will be farm produced, which I think is even better.
And for those of you who have an interest in the thing, I think that's a Cornish gamecock, which was a bit of a beast. Have we got any more? We've had a few questions, not an awful lot. Again, a bit of discussion going on with everybody there. And really based two different foodstuffs have you looked at? One was peanuts, lentils, chickpea or cottonseed feed, and also about byproducts from bakery and bakery waste feed. Although as you're making the original product of flour in the first place, I suspect it's not so necessary.
It's about the same protein. Yeah, it's not going to be any different.
Yeah, yeah. I will just touch on the question that you've mentioned. Yeah, the mealworm. There's been a question about, can you say a little bit about your mealworm production system? But equally, we've had questions previously right through about the feeding of worms and the way you use it. So could you just touch on that? And time is ticking, so quick, short answers, please.
Well, we can feed live mealworms, and we're looking, you know, we've got several months to actually work out the best way to do that. Actually producing the mealworms themselves, it's brought in live mealworms and then let them go to the pupa stage, and then they're hatched into beetles. And it's just a question, if you go on YouTube, there's loads and loads of tutorials from places all over the world where people are doing this. And it's just a question of, you know, taking all the best elements you want and actually actually setting up your own system. And we're now working on this. So we're still at the fairly early stages, but using a series of trays and sieves, trays with sieves in the bottom of them, you can actually sort of work out a way to actually separate the beetles from the worms and the eggs and the young larvae and start the whole process going. It's fascinating. It's not the easiest thing to do. It's not free food at all. Although the input, I mean, the great thing for us is that our input is the mill waste, for which we need, and the bit of extra protein we can put into that can actually come from the farm, and also it makes use of all the screenings that come out of the grain that goes into the flour mill and everything else. So it's all usable.
Great. They've got a question. Do you find egg production with black rock, barred rock breeds and on-farm feed production was viable economically within your system? I'm guessing yes, because you wouldn't do it if it wasn't. Yes,
that's the best one to come across so far.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Mike mentioned during this talk the work he did with us with OKNet EcoFeed. The information from that will be on organicfarmknowledge.org, but there is a presentation on the Innovative Farmers website, which was part of the project, which shows the sort of outline results from the work we were doing, looking at feed values of different commodities used through the sprouter and a bit of the development. So those who and particularly now with the avian lockdown, sprouted seeds is maybe a possible way of getting some green food into birds who are having to be locked in. And so it's sort of touched on a little bit within that, the production there, and there'll be a proper report written as soon as I actually get around to it. It's often the case. As we said, OKNet EcoFeed is a good source of knowledge, and organicfarmknowledge.org website. All the information will find its way to that as we get the research done. Okay. We are at the end of time, so we haven't really got time for any more questions. So just leaves it for me to thank everybody for your attendance and your interesting conversations. If anyone has asked a specific question to Florian particularly, and anyone has particular questions they want answered, if you could just leave your email address on the chat line, because we're not going to get, because GDPR reasons, and it means that you've accepted that we're going to use your email to contact the presenter to ask a question. We're not going to get email addresses from the organisers because of GDPR reasons. So I'd like to thank Mike, Leo and Florian for their time and efforts putting together this presentation. I want to thank also Oxford Real Farming Conference for giving us the opportunity to hold these events and to have these sessions. In the absence of being able to do it in situ, it's great that we've managed to have this way of doing it. And also thank Rebecca, the volunteer who has been making sure we do things properly in the background. We can't do this show does not, or event does not run without the volunteers, and we really appreciate the efforts they all put in. So thank you all very much for your attendance, and have a very good rest of the evening. Thank you for coming.